School of Pharmacy on this cool and rainy night. And we're very glad that you can take the time to join us. And tonight we're going to have a somewhat themed night focusing on the September, getting back to your routines. So we've decided to focus the topics around the idea of getting back to work. And tonight we have two speakers with us, the same as before. If you haven't joined us before, we usually do this as the first speaker will talk for about half an hour, and then there will be a question and answer period for discussion, comments, your questions, and then followed by a break, and then we go into the second speaker, basically doing the same routine. So if you're unfamiliar with the group, the Waterloo Regional Chronic Pain Initiative, the website will be up during the break as well. Please check out our website. It's a community-based grassroots group, and it's formed very much by the people, many of whom are around this room. So healthcare professionals and patients, caregivers, family members, community members who are just passionate about the topic of pain management, as well as or that they're living with chronic pain themselves. So there's a lot more information about the group on our website. But I'm going to get started introducing our first speaker of the night. So Matthew Stein. He's a PhD candidate in the Work and Health program in the School of Public Health and Health Systems at the University of Waterloo. He's also currently the Director of Social Research Center through the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology. And specifically with us, Matt has served on the committee that puts these workshops together right from its beginnings. So it's a pleasure today to introduce Matt to the podium.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me in the back? Yeah? Fantastic. So I'm going to talk to you today about navigating work with chronic pain. So just a little bit more about me before we get started, so that you have an idea where I stand, where I'm coming from, before talking about a topic like this. So I have chronic pain myself. I have psoriatic arthritis since about 2004, since really I started feeling it in my first year of university. I woke up one day, tried to get out of bed, struggled to get out of bed, thought I just sprained something or did something funny to my ankle, kept going and kept going and kept going until I finally found out, oh, you have arthritis. So my arthritis has shifted. It started in only my ankles. It's actually started only in my right ankle, and it has moved to my knees as well. Also, I think in my hands a bit as well lately. And I've managed it. I've tried to manage it. I'm here before you today. I'm walking around relatively well. There will be times where you'll sort of see it in my gait to some degree. But I'm here today. I'm talking about it. And basically what happened from that point on is I've devoted my academic career to studying this issue, to studying chronic pain. And it sort of shifted a bit as I've gone. So I started by looking at just generally chronic pain. And I happened to I happened to work for the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board for a couple of summers in my undergraduate degree. And I worked there, and it started to make the transition from not only looking at chronic pain, but specifically looking at chronic pain in the workplace. So I'm currently in the Work and Health program, so that's a collaborative program at the University of Waterloo. I'm in the public health stream of it. And right now, my own personal research is going to be looking at those who are self-employed or teleworking. Teleworking, by the way, for those of you who don't know, you're not necessarily working for yourself, but you're working for others out of a home-based environment or a non-traditional work environment. You may be spending time working at home. For me, I'm currently, in many times, a teleworker. I'm someone who, if I'm doing a research assistantship, or actually right now, currently my position as the director of the Social Research Center, I work most of my time during the week is teleworking, and the rest of my time I go into the physical office as well so that I'm able to strike that balance currently. So just a heads up that I'm going to be doing this research moving forward in the next few months. Nothing has been solidified yet, but keep your eyes peeled in the emails if you are intrigued by that. Professionally, I did work for the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board during my undergraduate degree. It wasn't so glory-filled. I was in the mailroom. I pushed around the mail cart. It was interesting though, because in working in the mailroom, I did sort of end up talking to a bunch of the different people who worked at the WSIB and the different roles that they had, and I sort of got a feel for the system because they train you about it, they talk to you about it, and it's a very interesting environment. So that's something I'm going to bring to you today from that perspective. So what am I actually going to talk to you about today? I'm going to give you some basic background statistics on chronic pain and work. Just some key information for you to see this is an important issue. You probably know this already, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting here. But why is it an issue? Then I'm going to talk very specifically for a second on workplace injuries that exist and how we manage it, how does the system work. That's a very workplace-focused aspect. And then afterwards, I'm going to talk about worker management of chronic pain and some strategies and things that exist within it. And I'm going to talk about workplace or employer management of chronic pain, and then translating to work at home. Now, something that we wanted to identify throughout is that think about, as we're going through, if you're not necessarily in a traditional workplace or you're working from home, or even if you do any type of work at home, we're trying to navigate away from the very narrow definition of work. So any type of work you may do at home, think about some of these issues, some of these strategies in the home environment. And we'll talk about it very concretely at the end, but it's just something to be aware of as we move on. So some basic statistics on chronic pain and work in Canada. There's an average of 28.5 lost work days per year due to chronic pain conditions. So that's about a month of time off work due to chronic pain conditions. That's pretty significant to both the worker and the workplace itself. About 60% of people with chronic pain will eventually lose their jobs and income, or will face some kind of reduction in responsibilities. So it could be something where you had a specific job role, you're no longer able to do it, and your job is somehow reduced as a result of your chronic pain condition, which can be significant to your morale, to how you go about things. It could be significant to the end, it could be significant to the income that you receive. In general, in the workplace, productivity costs related to job loss and sick days are at $37 billion per year in Canada. So that's from people who are not making it into work, people who are absent, people who are taking off lots of sick days. It's pretty significant, the amount of productivity losses as a result of these sorts of conditions. So, this is a lot of information. This is basically, I have combined the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board system into a single slide because we are going to go through it relatively quickly. It is not a focus. If you are injured at work, many people get injured at work, many people do not know how to navigate the system. Injuries at work can often lead to chronic pain conditions if they're not managed properly, or if you do have a chronic pain condition, you can be at greater risk for re-aggravating or additionally aggravating some of the chronic pain conditions you may have. So, if you are injured at work, the first thing that everyone needs to know in Canada, this is a paramount right that we have as workers in Canada, you have the right to refuse unsafe work. Many people don't know that, many people get taken advantage of it, by it. Because you have the right to refuse unsafe work, if you see something that is unsafe for you and puts you at risk for injury, you have the absolute right to refuse it and say, that is unsafe for me, without any risk for your employer coming back to you and saying any negative ramifications from your employer. That is a paramount right, that is a key right as Canadians. That is something very important to state right off the bat. People don't know that. People get injured because they are taken advantage of by that lack of knowledge. If you're injured at work, the one thing that you need to know is you need to fill out what's called the Form 6 or E-Form 6, depending on if you're filling it out online. Immediately, you need to put that out there. You need to fill out this worker report of injury or illness. The faster you put it out, the better. It starts a chain reaction of processes. The employer fills out a Form 7, your physician fills out a Form 8. All of these forms work together to build essentially a case history for the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, and this helps to form your concept of their concept of what actually happened in this situation. There's also a functional abilities form that happens down the line for the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board to be aware of what you are able to functionally do based on your pain conditions, based on your own abilities. So the worker deals with the claims adjudicator primarily. They are the primary point of contact. They are, in the grand scheme of things, they are the ones who receive the most amount of grief at the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board. There is a lot of health and safety concerns for them. Mental health issues with claims adjudicators are massive because you can have a lot of angry workers going to talk to them and being really angry with them. They really try and do their job well, but you can also, at times, you can come across claims adjudicators are a little bit grumpy, and that's probably why. You also have employers or workers who go through both the claims adjudicators and the customer service manager. They go through the workplace side of it. How to go through the process. If you were injured at work, or if you were injured at work, you need to know more about it. You need to know about your rights. You need to know about how to go through the process. The other thing is you need to be kind to the people. It's important to be kind to the people that work with you. Of the claims adjudicators that I know, you could tell when they were on the phone with different people, if someone was kind to them, their voice, their tone changed. They were more amenable to helping. There were elements of that going on. The other thing is be aware of the processes that exist and complete processes in a timely manner. Make sure that you're going through the steps you need to go through to make sure that your claims are filled out, everything goes through properly. Now the last two parts are labor market reintegration or reentry. That's a little bit older. Right now there's a focus on the return to work process. Now I'm actually, oddly enough, and this hasn't really been solidified yet, but I'm potentially signing myself on to do some work on the return to work process. It's a very interesting process, but it also has a lot of challenges and issues with the return to work process. And it is simply that there are a lot of flaws with it. And the Ministry of Labor is working on it. The statistic I heard, and this is something I heard a couple days ago, I don't know where it was necessarily published, but something to the effect of 45% of people who are still in the return to work process about a year or 2 years down the line live below the poverty line. So the return to work process in terms of getting back into the workplace is not necessarily as effective as it should be and needs to be. But not everyone is injured at work. We all know that. The fact is, we all need to know how to manage chronic pain at work. My chronic pain condition had nothing to do with work. I still need to go to work. I still need to figure out how to live with it at work. I still need to manage my condition. So, how do I go about managing it? What are the strategies that we put in place to manage a chronic pain condition in the workplace? So, pacing, relationships, and workplace modifications. So, let's go through them one by one. Pacing it's important to pace activity at work throughout the day. It's not necessarily the same pace at which you may have had before the onset of chronic pain, and that's something that we fail to recognize. We tend to, people with chronic pain, and this is a generalization, but it's something that I've seen quite frequently, we tend to try and compensate and end up doing things faster, and as a result you may end up aggravating your pain condition. You may speed up, you may not be using the proper postures, and you may end up aggravating your condition. The key in the workplace is that Pacing is based on what you can do, not based on the productivity requirements. You need to set your own pace, not necessarily base your pace on the workplace itself. It's important, this is important in setting manageable goals for yourself, setting achievable goals. Don't necessarily set goals that are so lofty that you're not actually able to achieve them. Make sure you also set reasonable expectations, both for yourself and also manage the expectations that your employers or coworkers may have of you. Talk to them about what you're able to do and make sure that they are aware of what you can do and you are aware of what you can do to make sure that everyone is creating a reasonable set of expectations. Also, make some modifications to the tasks themselves. Like, you may be trying to do something particularly quickly. It may be simply that the task is not optimized for the ability of what you are able to do and what you can do. You may need to make some shifts, some modifications. But the thing is that pacing does not only impact work. Pacing extends beyond work. If you push through your pain, which a lot of people tend to do, it can have cumulative impacts. It can be the type of thing where, an example that I can say today is, I had a lot to do yesterday, I had a lot to do today. I can tell you right now, I'm feeling it right now. I'm going to be feeling it tomorrow. I am most likely going to have, if I had to make a guess about tomorrow, I'm probably going to have a bit of an off day tomorrow. I'm going to be feeling my pain that much more because I pushed through because I knew I needed to get things done. Wasn't right of me to do, but I'm going to be feeling it tomorrow. And the impacts are going to extend. I'm not going to get nearly as much work done tomorrow as I'd like to. I'm not going to be able to relax as much tomorrow. I'm not going to be able to do all the things that I would like to do at home. I usually like to participate in cooking dinner. I'm not going to be able to do as much as I would generally like to because I pushed through my pain throughout the past couple of days. Relationships. People, this is something that's often forgotten in the workplace, that the workplace is a living and breathing entity. There are lots of people working in the workplace, your employers, your coworkers, people in other departments. The key really is open communication. We often sort of can internalize our pain condition and not talk openly about it and keep it to ourselves. In this circumstance, talking with your employer and coworker about your chronic pain condition can actually be helpful if you're comfortable with it and also if they're receptive to it. If they're not, obviously that's something for you to make a judgment call about. But if you talk to them about it and if you really paint a picture for them and make sure they're aware of what you're going through, they may be more receptive to offering help and to sort of offsetting some of the aspects of your condition. So don't be afraid to ask for help, but also try and put yourself out there to offer help in things that you are more able to do. Like, we may struggle with certain aspects of a job, but we may be still able to do other aspects of the job without any impact on our pain. So offer to sort of trade off a little bit, and that might be helpful. The other thing is, try to be appreciative when the coworkers help you out. I know that in talking with people with chronic pain in the work, in past research I've done, they had mentioned that coworkers really found it valuable when they were appreciative and when people with pain showed appreciation to coworkers. In terms of employers, be honest about your condition. Be honest about your limitation. Manage your limitations and manage expectations. Offer to accommodate. Offer to shift things that way. And also, sometimes we have bad employers. Sometimes there are employers out there who are mean, who are not really considerate. The key is to try and diffuse these hostile relationships as quickly as possible to make the workplace environment as pleasant and as accommodating as possible. Task modification. We mentioned this earlier in pacing very briefly. Discussing the job or responsibilities with your employer and finding creative ways to make the position easier or more manageable. Making shifts to the tasks. Maybe doing tasks in shorter bursts, or something like that, taking more breaks throughout the day and not necessarily taking one longer break. Ergonomics, this is something that's going to be talked about in the next presentation, but make sure you get assessed for ergonomics in your environment. Oftentimes, ergonomics is sort of how our body and environment work together to some degree, and make sure that you are properly set up in your environment. And this goes to modifications itself. In my work environment in Oshawa, I have an adjustable desk, which I thought was really cool that it was in my office. It wasn't set up when I got there. And it's this desk that lifts up and I can stand at it, or pushes back down where I can sit. It adjusts into both positions, and a bunch of them in between. So when I'm in pain, it can be difficult for me to shift from standing to sitting positions. So sometimes I'll just go and just lift up the desk and be able to stand at my desk, still do work, and still be able to go through my day. Also, anti-fatigue mats can be very helpful in the workplace. So, workplace management of chronic pain, absenteeism, presenteeism, and managing relationships, and some accommodating modifications. So, absenteeism versus presenteeism. Absenteeism is the one we know. Absenteeism is time off work as a result of a condition in some way, shape, or form. So, the questions to ask for absenteeism is, how are you actually spending your time at home off work? Are you actively recuperating, or are you simply getting into a pattern that may extend your time off work? Are you successful in your time off work? Are you doing something? Are you managing your condition? Are you taking care of yourself? That can be very important. But also making sure that if you are off work, come up with manageable strategies with your employer to make the return to work process actually successful. Make sure that it works for you and it works for them. Oftentimes, there's a strategy that gets put in place and it just doesn't work for anyone. It's something that we think will work, but it doesn't. So the key is to come up with manageable strategies. In terms of coworkers, it's quite possible that either coworkers are going to take over your work or they're going to hire a temporary replacement. Oftentimes the temporary replacement isn't trained particularly well, so there's challenges that exist in the workplace environment as a result of your time off work. So this is something that needs to be managed from the workplace perspective. In terms of presenteeism, this is the one that we don't actually think about. Presenteeism is being at work, but actually not able to complete tasks. So you go into work, you're just not yourself. I don't know if any of you feel this way. You go into, I'm sure everyone does to some degree, where you just go into work, you're not productive, you're not yourself, you're just feeling out of it. And your productivity is diminished, your coworkers might be feeling the brunt of it because they're going to end up doing a lot more work to try and offset this, and that can create a significant challenge in the workplace. In terms of managing relationships, one of the key things is to make sure your coworkers don't become resentful. If your coworkers end up becoming resentful and angry, it's going to create a very unpleasant workplace environment, and chronic pain is not going to end up being your only issue in the workplace environment. So one of the key responsibilities in the workplace to make this easier and better is to make sure your coworkers are positive and on your side and working with you. But also making sure that you have open communication with management, with employers, and make sure that everyone is on the same page, make sure everyone is on board with the same strategies and are happy with it and can manage it. Now, the thing about making these modifications, we talked about standing desks, we talked about different changes to the workplace environment itself. These can be very expensive. And at the end of the day, for some employers, it's a business. They need to be considerate, and there are different ways that they can get these accommodations, but they might be challenged in doing so. So it's important to work as a team to make sure the accommodations they are getting are the right ones that work for you and work for you best to help you manage the work so that it's actually worth it. Because a lot of times they'll spend all this money on all these different sorts of modifications, half them work, half them do absolutely nothing, and at the end of the day they're spending money for nothing and you're not getting anything out of it. They're facing some sort of financial implications, and that can be a bad situation. So, how do we now translate everything that we've talked about to home? So the fact is, there's plenty of things that we do at home. Even if, like, for me, I actually work at home 4 days a week. I sit there during the day, I try and pace myself during the day to get certain things done. But we also do things around the house, like cooking meals, helping to clean, doing some chores around the house. Or we participate in hobbies, and it's important to take some of these things that we learn about, some of these strategies, and actually apply them into the home environment as well. Things like pacing, things like modifying your tasks or modifying the environment to help make these tasks easier. So the other thing is, we may not actually have coworkers. We don't have coworkers at home, but we do have our family and our friends in our home environment. And a lot of these strategies that we have in terms of open communication and making sure we are being clear about our needs and how this actually works can be very important in the home environment as well as at work. So those are some strategies that are very important. That's all I've got. Thank you very much for listening, and happy to answer any questions you might have. If you have a question, if you can push the button in front of you. There's a little silver button on the plaque. If you have a question, feel free to push it. It'll activate the microphone, and I'll be able to see it, and we'll go from there. Oh, okay. So up in the, is it actually going? Okay, hold on, trying this. Okay, over there, there's a question. Yeah.
I was just wondering, how have employers responded to patient or employees with chronic pain? Or how have you found that?
It's very much dependent on the employer themselves. So the question was, for those of you who may not have heard, how do employers tend to respond to employees or workers with chronic pain? It really depends on the employer. Some employers can become resentful. It's a lot more work for them. Some employers totally understand it's something out of their control. It really depends on the employer. It depends who you end up getting. It's one of those things where you like to hope that an employer is going to be accommodating, but it really is very hit or miss. Oftentimes, in particular with chronic pain, one of the challenges is that chronic pain can be seen as an invisible condition. Like, if you look at me right now, if I didn't tell you I had chronic pain, you wouldn't see that you wouldn't peg me as someone who has chronic pain. I do. It doesn't make my condition any less important, but for an employer, there can often be this belief of faking it, or that it's not actually real or as severe as you would think. And that can be a real challenge, and I think the challenge there is education, and making sure that the employer is actively aware of what you are going through, and hopefully is accommodating. And if they're not, that's one of those situations where you can, I hate to use the U word here, but that's when if there's a union involved, you would talk to your union, or you would probably escalate it if there was situations of maybe harassment or anything like that along those lines. Okay? Let's keep going. Okay. Hold on. Okay, this is not working as well. Oh, there is, okay, hold on. Let me just try this one more time. Oh, there is in the next one. There was something in the middle here and something that we saw. Oh, there we go. There, over on this side.
Hi, so I'm a university student.
Yep.
And I suffer from chronic pain and do a lot of group work and that sort of thing. When you're approaching it, is it best you find to like preemptively tell the people around you Or do you wait for the first sort of incident where chronic pain becomes something like a barrier before you start to inform the people around you? Like, and then if you do preemptively, how do you initiate that conversation without seeming like you're asking for help when initially you're just letting people know that you may need some assistance or some sort of accommodation or some sort of adjustments or modification along the way?
That is an awesome question. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. That's something I've dealt with before. I dealt with it to some degree when I was a university student, but I've certainly dealt with it more now that I've been a TA. I was a TA. And it's actually something that's really challenging. So I'm going to take it from the perspective of the TA because it is kind of a group work situation, and we'll sort of apply it backwards that way. So it's an interesting story, oddly enough. Friend of mine who's in the room, we were TAs together, and the first day, I was awful. It was last year. I was struggling mightily. I was walking with a cane. I wasn't doing well, and it was the type of thing where there was that visible thing which obviously helped. But as it turned out, it was something where I said, it was an 8:30 a.m. class, which is brutal to begin with. I'm not a morning person myself, and at the best of times, and that's even worse because it takes me that much longer to get to and from places. It was a lecture hall that was one of those stadium seating lecture halls, and steep too. So it would take me like 10 minutes to get from the top of the lecture hall to the bottom. And it was a class where we really had to move around a lot. And it was a type of thing that, as it turns out, they also had chronic pain as well, which was obviously fortuitous in that situation. But it was one of those situations where we sort of learned to offset each other's strengths and weaknesses. In a group work, it's a challenging situation, especially depending on who you're dealing with. You're dealing with some people who may not necessarily be as understanding off the bat. And group dynamics in particular can be really challenging and awful at the best of times because you want to make sure that everyone's pulling their weight and everything like that. So you have that interesting dynamic. Yes, it's important to state it early on, but it's also important to identify how this will work and how you still will probably contribute or find ways, in form of ways that it might be challenging for you, but also in form of ways where you might need someone to offset and tell them how you can manage. And I think that's important. It's important to frame it as such, as something that's a challenge, but not something that can't be overcome, and not something that you're willing to work with and try and make sure to still be a part of the group and manage and everything like that. The other thing might be, in that sort of situation, to make sure that you're probably registered with the appropriate services and make sure that the professor also is aware of circumstances, just to make sure in those situations that if there are group dynamic conflicts, that they may be able to step in and sort of smooth things over. Yeah. Okay. Oh, you can.
Go ahead. So the next one.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering if there's any types of professionals that can work with people to teach them about pacing?
I would imagine that's going to be our next presentation. I think that's going to be covered pretty well. Yeah, that will be covered in that way. In terms of pacing otherwise, there's lots of different tools out there as well if you don't want to necessarily go the professional route, and I would imagine those will also.
That's the thing I struggle with the most, because I'm one of those push through the pain until I break people, and that's not good for my condition, so.
A lot of us are. It's an interesting thing to track, and it's something that's been talked a lot about in research. So it's definitely something that can be addressed, and there's lots out there that can be helpful. Okay. Up there. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it.
I'm just curious about the potential applicants who might be suffering from chronic pain, and if there's any ethical implications of not disclosing that out of fear of not being the right candidate for that job.
So the question was, for those of you who may not have heard, job applicants who have a chronic pain condition and the ethics of disclosing, not disclosing for fear of not actually getting that job. There's aspects of discrimination, there's obviously aspects of discrimination and everything like that. Are you asking whether or not you should disclose, or are you asking whether, I would imagine there are things in place for equal opportunities in those sorts of circumstances. I would imagine those with chronic pain would have some rights available to them, but at the same time also, it would be an interesting case. Like, for example, if I were to go and apply for a job, and I were to apply for a job that required me, let's say I was applying for a job to be a mail carrier. Someone who was needed to walk around, and not just a mail carrier, but an on-foot mail carrier, someone who walks around a lot for their job. That would be an interesting situation as to whether or not, A, the appropriateness of me applying for that job, and B, the ethical considerations, as you put it, as to whether or not that would be the case. It's an interesting circumstance. It's actually something I don't know a ton about. I would imagine if it's just a general job and it's not a specific part of that job, then it's something to develop over time.
It's just interesting because some jobs, they may or may not be required to lift 40 pounds.
Right.
Something like that. So if you're applying for a cashier job and it says it there, is that enough for the employer to be like, hey, well, I do something?
It's interesting. It would be the type of thing where, is it also an everyday responsibility or is it an occasional responsibility? If you're a cashier who's required to lift 40 pounds and are unable to once every so often, there probably could be modifications to be made. There might be modifications to be made, or there might be a trade-off in responsibilities accordingly for someone like that to still be able to do that job. And I think that would be a situation for something like the WSIB to potentially get involved and talk about that, and talk about the environment and the responsibilities. I think that would be my guess on that one. Oh.
Hi. Yeah, so it's sort of late, so maybe you covered this already, but I'm just wondering about the scenario where I know there's laws in place where you can't discriminate about situations like that. But when you get sick at work, I understand the employer cannot simply fire you because of a health condition and then you go on short-term leave, long-term leave sort of scenario. Do you have any sort of comments around that?
Are you talking about if you get sick at work as a result of the work, or sick at work as a result of something different?
Either.
So
If you come down with an illness which impedes your work, then I guess the scenario is that the employer can't simply fire you because you have a condition.
no, and that would be the type of thing. If you notice the illness at work, you would probably go through the WSIB process, which was on one of the earlier slides, where you would fill in all of the key information. If it's something that occurred because of work, that would obviously be something where the processes are in place and they're clear processes. If it's something that happened alongside work, you probably could have something where your job you wouldn't necessarily be fired, you might go on disability leave and go through that process separately, but not necessarily through filing a claim. So there might be parallel processes that exist depending on what the nature of it is. And that's part of the problem as well with the WSIB system, and what a lot of people don't tend to realize is that it's a non-fault system. And what workplaces don't realize is it is a non-fault system. There are premiums set by category, not necessarily by the amount of injuries you have in the workplace. So there is this sort of dynamic where you don't want, this disclosure of injuries can be challenging, injuries or illnesses, but it's one of those things where I would imagine either way you would talk to them, you would fill out the form is actually talking about injury or illness at work, and then they would direct you through, that would be my first point of contact.
And is there any step in there where you would want to, say, get a lawyer involved on your behalf?
Generally, unless you are actively fired, at that point you would probably want to get a labor lawyer involved to determine what your rights are. If you're not fired, it would be the type of thing where the WSIB would act on your behalf. You would fill out these forms, they would evaluate the situation and direct you through the appropriate processes.
Great, thank you very much for an informative session, Matt. So we're going to take a break now. There's refreshment in the hallway, so feel free to stand up, stretch a little bit, mingle, and enjoy some refreshments. And if you need to use the bathroom, they're just down the hall to your left from the next hallway from this door. And we'll resume with the next session in about 15 minutes. Thank you.